This weekend, I watched the Netflix documentary Chaos, The Manson Murders. And there's something Bobby Beausoleil said that I really want to unpack. Bobby told the producers, "I think it's important that the story be stripped down to the bare bones. There's no doubt in my mind what the motivation was. None. Zero. Charlie had gotten paranoid of his own people. He wanted to bind them to him through their committing bad crimes. That was the true motive. So he sent Tex Watson to kill Terry Melcher. Terry lived at Cielo Drive all the time that Charlie knew him. He didn't know that Terry had moved. Watson asked, 'What if there's somebody else there?' Charlie just told him to kill whoever's there. The ignorance of not knowing that Terry had left that residence meant that 5 other people got murdered." The first part of Bobby's statement about Charlie getting paranoid and wanting to tie the family to him through violence, essentially blackmailing them so they couldn't turn on him, and giving them a potential future taste of what he'd experienced much of his life with the prison system. And yes, that idea is backed up elsewhere. Let me read you a quote from Susan Atkins' second book, The Myth of Helter Skelter. It was published after her death, but includes a very relevant passage. "When Manson heard that I wasn't able to hold the gun on Gary Hinman during that murder, he made sure that I was included in the Cielo murders. When he heard that Linda Kasabian had run from the Cielo murders, he made sure she was included on the night of the La Bianca murders. He shamed Bobby Beausoleil into committing the Hinman murder by pointing out that he, Charles Manson, had already shot Bernard Crowe. Then he shamed or psyched Charles Watson into the Cielo La Bianca killings by pointing to the sacrifice that he and Bobby Beausoleil had made for the family with the Hinman murder. He then psyched out Steve Grogan into the Shea murder by pointing to Beausoleil and Watson. One by one, everyone was dirtied until no one was left to finger Manson." So yes, that part of Bobby's statement that Manson wanted the family bound together by blood is consistent with other testimony. It fits with a broader theory. Manson wasn't just lashing out at society. He was punishing his own followers for what he saw as disobedience or disloyalty. He selected each killer with purpose, and in doing so created a chain of complicity. But let's get to the second part of Bobby's quote. Charlie didn't know Terry Melcher had moved out of Cielo Drive. That is not true. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying Bobby was lying. He was in jail when the murders happened. He had been arrested 2 days earlier. So any story he heard about the motive or the targets would have come from secondhand sources, possibly long after the fact. But what we do know, based on other events and witness statements, is that Manson absolutely did know that Terry Melcher no longer lived at Cielo. There are a series of key incidents that support this. Incident number 1, March 23, 1969. Now, this first incident is a little controversial. Some people have begun to recently question the credibility of one of the witnesses due to alleged trial misconduct, but let's go over it anyway. According to trial testimony and later books, on March 23, 1969, Manson showed up at Cielo Drive looking for Terry Melcher, who had moved out a little over 2 months before. Charlie walked up to the pool area between the main house and the guest cottage. Sharon Tate's friend, photographer Shiro Katami, was there setting up for a shoot. Charlie asked for Terry. Katami didn't recognize the name and pointed toward the guest house where Rudy Altobelli, the property owner, was staying. Charlie then walked over to the guest house and encountered Altobelli, who immediately told him to leave. Altobelli knew who Manson was. He'd met him the year before at a party at Dennis Wilson's house and had not liked him. As Manson was leaving, Sharon Tate and her friends Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojtek Frykowski, the same people who 5 months later would be killed with Sharon. They were all together in the main house and saw Charlie out the front window. Some accounts say Sharon even stepped out onto the porch to look. Later, on a flight to Europe, Altabelli said Sharon turned to him and asked, "Did that creepy little man come back to the house?" If that account is true, and again it was repeated under oath, then Manson knew as early as March that Melcher no longer lived at Cielo. But even if you don't accept that story, it's not the only incident. Let's fast forward to the first week of June 1969. Terry Melcher visited Spahn Ranch twice that week. The first time, he came with Greg Jacobson to talk with Charlie about the possibility of recording his music. A few days later, he came back with Mike Deasy, a session musician with a mobile studio van, brought along to record Manson in his natural setting. Melcher had already learned that Manson didn't do well in a traditional studio. He got nervous and unfocused. So the idea was record him outdoors at Spahn Ranch with his family around, and he'd be more comfortable. Charlie was thrilled. DC being there, brought by Melcher, meant Harry was going to help him. And remember, Melcher was a big deal at Columbia Records. This wasn't just about music. This was Charlie's whole identity. But things quickly went south. While Melcher was there, he saw Manson lose his temper and hit a stuntman named Randy Starr. It rattled him. He saw firsthand that Manson was volatile and not someone he could work with. Melcher gave Charlie $50 before leaving, possibly for food for all the emaciated teens hovering around Manson, though he told Charlie it was for hay for the horses. Charlie took that money as a sign, a promissory note. He thought Melcher was giving him a dividend on his musical future. Meanwhile, the recording session with Mike Deasy was a disaster. Deasy was given LSD by the girls, had a bad trip, and ended up fleeing Spahn Ranch the next day. Soon after that, Melcher called the ranch and told Manson flat out, "I'm not the right producer for you." And according to Charles Sunshine Pierce, a Texan who had been staying at the ranch, Charlie responded by asking him to kill Melcher. Pierce refused and left the ranch the very next day. A few weeks later, in July 1969, there are two more incidents that validate the fact that Charlie knew Melcher had moved away from Cielo Drive. In mid-July, Charlie and a few of the girls went looking for Melcher again, but they didn't go to Cielo. They went to a property owned by Doris Day, Terry's mother. He wasn't there, but they got information there about where he was staying. That day, or a few days later, they showed up at a beach house in Malibu, Melcher's new home. It was a property Doris was renting, but Melcher was living there. No one was there when the family arrived, but they left a message. They stole an expensive telescope from the porch, a not-so-subtle way to say, "We know where you live now." So let's recap this. Even if you ignore the March visit, you still have 2 visits from Melcher to Spahn Ranch in June, and Manson himself going to Melcher's Malibu home in July. He absolutely knew Terry no longer lived at Cielo. So what does that mean? It means that the 4 people who left Spahn Ranch late on August 8th, Tex, Susan, Patricia, and Linda, did not believe they were going to kill Terry Melcher. That was not the mission. Whether Charlie ordered the killings, orchestrated them, or simply knew what they might be doing, Melcher was not the target. And I don't believe they thought they were going to kill Sharon Tate either. According to testimony, Manson may not have even seen Sharon that day in March. His back was likely turned as he went to his car and she looked out the window. So who was the target of the murders at Cielo Drive? Maybe it wasn't about a person at all. Maybe it was the house. The house where Manson thought his music dreams were going to come true. The house where a powerful record producer had once entertained him, then cut him off. The house with the best view of the Hollywood Bowl, representing not just the establishment, but the elite. The house he'd visited multiple times. He later claimed it was 6. And the house where he'd been told, bluntly, to get lost. That night, when those 4 people drove away from Spawn Ranch, it wasn't Terry Melcher they were after, and it wasn't Sharon Tate. It may not have been about who was inside. It was the location itself, a symbol of rejection, of failure, and of humiliation. And Cielo wasn't just revenge on the snobs who lived there, past or present, nor was it exclusively punishment for disobedient family members. It was Charles Manson, lashing out at the ghost of the life he believed he deserved, and wanting to hurt everyone who he believed took it away from him. What do you think? I do hope you'll consider joining our membership, The Collaborant, where we take a deeper dive into the story of the Manson family, plus other crime and cult stories. This week, we'll be live to talk more about the reasons for the murders at Cielo Drive. I hope to see you there.